Preview. Preview.
Senior Flores, 101st veteran. We have Mr. Max Schneider. He is a veteran of the 82nd Engineers, and he is a 86. 86. I got 86 written. And Gus Butterbach is a 87th Infantry. He's right here. We also have Mr. Ray Maverick, right here. Ray, stand up for a second. Ray is probably one of the most unusual folks that you're going to ever meet. Ray, you gotta look that way. Everybody's looking at you. Ray saw the surrender in Europe and in Japan. How many times were there? Well, there was 3 surrenders. Ray is one of those most unusual veterans to see the surrender ceremony twice. Thank you, Ray. And also we have Mr. Gus Butterbach, who's right here, which I introduced. Oh, here they are. Here's George Casamaxi right here. George, 101st. Now, George started many years ago. He hosted a program called the Lunch Brunch, where veterans would get together, they would have lunch, and then there would be some type of historical talk or presentation, and then maybe exchanging of goodwills and good tidings and stuff like that. And it's still going strong. It's this Wednesday at the Finnish Cultural Center. So if you are a veteran, George always has it on the 3rd Wednesday at the Finnish Cultural Center in Farmington Hills. Right here to my immediate left is John Sosha, Vietnam veteran, 101st, 82nd, Special Forces. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I'm the current Secretary Treasurer of the Michigan chapter of the 101st Airborne Division, of which these gentlemen here started back in 1946 after the war ended. And we meet every year since then. And this year is the 70th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, Bastogne, in which these gentlemen all participated. And they were there surrounded by the German army. And they were there when General McCulloch made his famous reply to the German surrender request of nuts. They were there and they lived through it, so we're glad to have them. And they are the reason we have this organization today. And let's not forget our friends from the 82nd who were there too.
And that's Joseph Hertel, right here, Joseph. So today marks, on the 16th of December, it marks the 70th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. And it was considered the last great offensive in the West by the Germans. And what happened was the Germans basically cannibalized their Eastern Front defenses. And they moved their most modern tanks and their most modern equipment to the West. And their objective was to create a bulge or a saline through the American lines, dividing the British and the Americans. And their goal was to take the coastal port of Antwerp. And it was Adolf Hitler's plan that they would take Antwerp and then make the Allies sue for peace, or come to a conditional surrender in the West. so that the real enemy, which was the Russians, pardon anyone as a Russian descent, the Germans looked at the Russians as their real, true enemy. They thought they could get along with the Western Allies, but they wanted to chase the Russians back. And at this particular time, the Russians were on the doorstep of Germany. And what they were doing was they wanted to push them back and take some of the lands that they had lost through Romania and through the southern area of Europe. So today we're here to honor these gentlemen, and they each fought. You know, the history of the 101st was that the 101st fought and secured the town of Bastogne. Now, if you're a student of history, of Civil War history, Gettysburg is much of the equivalent of Bastogne. It was what was called a roadway town. 6 roads going in, 6 roads going out, okay? All the local roads came in there. In this particular region, there was no freeway bypasses, there was nothing like that. The roads came into the town and the roads left the town. So the 101st, to their credit, were rushed up to secure the town of Bastogne. The 82nd was rushed to the north in a town called St. Vith. And they held it for as long as they could. They actually lost the town and then recaptured the town about 2 weeks later. During the battle, the operation, the German operation of code name was Operation Autumn Mist. A lot of people don't know that. Because the Germans never broadcasted their operational plans over the radio. It was the very first time that they'd done that throughout the entire war. They actually believed at this particular time that the Allies were listening and decoding their radio messages, and they were absolutely correct. They were decoding right on the button. And by not broadcasting things on the radio, what their operational plans was, it tipped off the Allied planners in a couple of different armies. First Army knew about it, and Third Army intelligence. And they were sending coded message back and forth. What are the Germans doing? I think they're going to mount a major offensive, but they didn't realize where they were going to mount this attack. And the attack was launched against the 99th and the 106th Division. Now, the Germans had absolutely no idea that these were 2 brand new divisions brought from the United States. They had very little combat time at all. They were, Eisenhower placed them in an area called the Ardennes Forest. It was, to the Germans, this was a mystical, magical area. This is where they launched their attack in May 1940 against the French. And what they did was the Germans had collected a number of English-speaking Wehrmacht soldiers and put them in the lead. So once they had moved up to the front, they put these English-speaking commandos in the front, caused confusion in the Allied lines because the Allies let them go through the lines and go to the rear, where they caused confusion. They were blowing up things. They were blowing up bridges, smaller bridges, not bridges that would bring armor across. Caused a lot of havoc. So when the battle started on December 16th, the American armies and the British armies had no idea to the strength of this. The only major, the 2 major generals that were in the theater at this time was Omar Bradley and George Patton. They were the only 3-star generals. The rest of them were either in Paris. Eisenhower's chauffeur, Kay Summersby, was getting married. So most of his staff, including the general, was in England, and much to Eisenhower's demise, General George C. Marshall was promoted to 5-star general, and Eisenhower was promoted that morning to 5-star general. So instead of taking this attack seriously, they were basically having a very large party, and they were enjoying themselves. Also, what they used was folks like right here, this gentleman right here, combat engineers. They were moved to the rear. Okay, they brought them. They were from the rear. They moved them up to the front, and they were used to either secure roadways or bridges, and help either the Americans come backwards or to blow the bridges up after the Americans had moved to the rear. Taking Bastogne, and as I said, the 82nd taking St. Vith. They were to hold these very vital road junctions. Now, the Germans attacked with 5 panzer divisions and 13 infantry divisions, the equivalent of 4 armies, against about the equivalent of 4 American divisions at this particular time. So all they can do is a holding action and a delay action. That's all they can do. So it's these, of course you are, sir. And of course, well, no, you were a replacement. You moved up with Patton's 3rd Army. What happened was, no one took the attack seriously for about 3 or 4 days. The weather was horrible, absolutely horrible. And the Germans had moved into these areas quietly, under the cover, under a weather cover, and basically no one knew they were there. They had used the most advanced tanks. They had captured 3 of the American fuel and ammo dumps in the first 5 days, which gave them enough fuel to keep running. Then they realized that the Americans should start blowing up their fuel and ammo dumps in lieu of them being captured. So I want to show you a couple pictures. This is the German attack right here. This is an American half-track, as you can see in the back. We have an American half-track right here. Now this one was not in the Battle of Bulge, but before you leave today, there are some vehicles here in the museum that were in the Battle of Bulge. That truck that those young men are standing right behind right there, like that young man. Right there. That truck was in the Battle of Bulge. The Jeep, one of the Jeeps up in the front was in the Battle of Bulge. One of the very new pieces of equipment for the Americans was the 1944 M20. That's on the other side of the half-track. That vehicle was in the Battle of Bulge. And the motorcycle up in the front, that is a veteran of the Battle of Bulge. In fact, I got that motorcycle out of the 4th Armored Division when it was in Stuttgart, just before they closed the doors on it. That motorcycle was featured in the movie Saving Private Ryan. So as we go through the German attack, the Germans had a great vigor, a great enthusiasm, lots of energy, because this felt like this is something great. They had new equipment, they had plenty of food, plenty of ammo, and some of these tanks that the Germans were using, most of the German troops had never even seen them before.
Yeah, that's fine.
Did you change the code?
Look behind
You
you.
want me to do it?
It's fine.
See, he's clever. See that? That's James Berlino, my resident historian. Let me go through introduction. Phil Hagen is the owner of the half-track, and also he drives all the vehicles here. He's a museum assistant. Jason and Paulie are museum assistants right here, and then Daniel. And of course, the man, why you're all here, why all you people decide to be here today is because of this gentleman right here. That is Brian, who wrote the story in C&G newspaper. So Brian's been a great help. So this is how basically the Germans moved their equipment up. They used these old railroad lines that were actually developed in World War I. And the Allies thought that these railroad lines were obsolete and they wouldn't, the gauges were wrong and this and that. But during the cover of darkness, the Germans had re-engineered all the railroad lines. This is if you were here earlier, if anybody was here earlier, we have a Kugelwagen right now, but this is the Schwimmwagen right here. And we had a Schwimmwagen here. It's coming back this summer. So they were both made by Volkswagen. They're pretty neat vehicles. My Uncle Kenny's sitting in it right now, so Kugelwagen. But basically, this is the German attack, and they used SS Panzer divisions for the lead. These units were the best trained units in the German army, the SS Panzer units, because they had all been brought from the Eastern Front. But unfortunately, they were used to fighting the Russians, and they were not used to fighting the Americans. And this will come up in a minute. As the attack goes on, we're into day 3, day 4. The Germans, very successful attack. And remember, the Americans, because of the low clouds, Americans can't use any air cover to sustain any type of defense. Largest surrender in the European theater was during the Battle of Bulge. 7,500 men were surrounded and forced to surrender. So most of them were the 106th and the 99th and the 28th Division. Now the 28th Division was a Pennsylvania National Guard unit, and they had just fought a very long action called the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest. And a lot of people don't even know anything about the Hürtgen Forest because the battle had just ended, and then the Battle of Bulge started. So the Hürtgen Forest was basically 3 German divisions, 3 American divisions, and they slugged it out in a place called the Hürtgen Forest. And it's synonymous with the Hansel and Gretel fairy tales, so that's where they were all there. Of course, the Germans enjoyed American cigarettes, and of course, you see the vehicle right here? M20. The M20 and the Jeep were the most favorite vehicles for the Germans to capture and then reuse. They absolutely loved them.
One more?
Yeah, please. If I put my hand up there, that means next picture.
Okay.
I'm trying to send a message right now. I hope. Okay, go back. New York Times. This is the headline. This was inconceivable to the American public. The American public was told basically by Roosevelt in a speech, okay, in October 1944. Let me tell you a quick story about Roosevelt. In 1944, he's running for an unprecedented 4th time, okay? He was considered a feeble old man, okay? And of course, he was running against Dewey. And Dewey was more than happy to label Roosevelt as this feeble old man. And Dewey knew that Roosevelt was a cripple. But the media didn't want that out. They would leak small photos of it to get people kind of used to the idea that the man is paralyzed and this and that. So what does Roosevelt do? He gets into a convertible car when he is campaigning in New York. A convertible car in a pouring down rain. It rained all day long, and drove and did all the boroughs of New York campaigning that day. All right? For the next 3 weeks, he was in a New York hotel room with pneumonia. He almost died. But he wanted to prove to the American public that he was strong. So Roosevelt had told the American public the war in Europe is won, and that we were going to move on to the Pacific, to end the war in the Pacific. So when this headline came out on December 23rd, which was the first major headline in the United States, the American public couldn't believe it, that the Germans had struck back. And it was very easy for the Germans to strike back because they had been being pushed back until their supply lines were minimum, and then they could strike. The American and British supply lines were at their maximum rate just before the Battle of Bulge. They were really tough off. And of course, here's a famous picture of the 101st trying to get Chow at the battle at Bastogne. And of course, on the day after Christmas, Bastogne was bombed by the Germans. Next. As you can see, these are German reconnaissance units. So what happened was, once the Germans got past, they ran out of fuel and ammo. Okay, because they took the first 3 ammo dumps very successfully, but they couldn't take. There was about 10 other ones, and they couldn't take them. So what they did, the Germans were very clever. This is what they did on the Russian front. They minimized themselves into small hunter-killer groups, is what they call them. Groups of, they would minimize themselves to 50 to 100 tanks apiece, and maybe 3 or 4 regiments of infantry. And then they were given new orders to secure new areas. The objective of the Germans was to reach the River Meuse and then on to Antwerp. When they realized that they could only reach the River Meuse, they downsized themselves into small hunter-killer groups, and then when their ammo and fuel was exhausted, they were given orders to get back through the lines as best they could, leave their equipment and leave. What happens is when they left all their equipment, that equipment could not be replaced because the German war effort couldn't replace it. Next photo, please. This telegram, this is how people were given death notices in World War II. These telegrams came out literally by tens of thousands during the Battle of Bulge. 610,000 American troops and British troops were fought in the Battle of Bulge, 400,000 Germans. The casualty rate on both sides of the battles were about the same, okay, except the Germans lost artillery, tanks, and equipment that they could not replace. They had cannibalized their eastern front for this one-time attack. Next, please. This is the Malmedy massacre. What is SS Trooper General Piper? What happened was when his lead units got to Malmedy, they couldn't take them prisoners. They had captured about 100 men of an engineering corps. They couldn't take them. and they were going to basically try and march into the rear, but they didn't have the manpower to do it. So Piper ordered them to be shot, executed in the field. Now, when they started shooting people, of course, they all started running. Not all of them, a lot of them were shot immediately. But a handful of them got out. And because of this disaster, this massacre, this was the cutting edge. When this news leaked to all the Allied units, this is what made a lot of units that were cut off stand and fight all the way. And there's lots of, not only these gentlemen that are here today, there's lots of stories of groups of 20 and 30 men that stood their ground to the end. There's a story out there of the 761st. They were an Afro-American group. They stood and they fought all the way. An artillery group, a cannon cockers. They actually turned their 155s downward instead of in the air and used them as anti-tank cannons to stop the Germans. So these folks were honored because they're here today, but there were many, many, many brave individuals that stood there and fought. The flank they could, then they were cut off by Patton's Third Army and by the British in the north. The battle basically ended in February, beginning of February 1945. From that battle, the Germans never recovered. So folks, what I'm going to do today is I want to introduce, of course I've introduced our panel. Anyone has any questions for these gentlemen? Feel free, raise your hand, and let's have a question.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Kasimaki, you the same one who, authored a few books on the Bulge?
Yes, yeah, George is an author, yes.
Yes, I've read one of his books before, and I actually talked to him years ago.
Yeah, George is the author of many books.
Yeah, a friend of mine was in
George and of course Don.
A friend of mine was in I-Company when I first and told me about it. It was not his bulky book. And in this one particular book, and I can't recall the title, if you can help me, every single name of them who served as one of the first is listed.
Jimmy, what book is that?
What is that? Which one? Battered Bastards of Bastogne.
What is it? Battling Bastards?
Battered Bastards.
Bastogne. Arnold right there was, he was a glider troop. Paratrooper, Don paratrooper, engineer. Infantryman. Jason.
I got a question for Mr. Kastamaki. You were General Taylor's personal radio operator. What was he like?
It didn't matter whether you were an officer or a general or a private, you got the same treatment. It was not fair. Well, he was fair as far as legal. I apologize for the lack of listening by hearing, but I'll try to do what I can.
Thanks, George. Yes, sir.
For all of you that fought against the SS soldiers, as soldiers yourself, what was your opinion of the German SS soldier? This is for the whole board.
What was it like to fight against the SS? Anybody? Don? What was it like to fight against the SS?
That's hard to say because I got hit the second day and evacuated the third day.
Don got hit on the second day and evacuated the third day of the battle. Arnold, what was it like fighting against the SS? No picnic, Arnold says. What was it like to fight against the SS?
It's tougher than the others.
Yeah, that's true.
My biggest accomplishment driving D-Day at 55 years of age.
There you go.
He had one good moment.
Okay.
In Salzburg, Austria, say that we were not combat engineers. We were heavy pots. We built bridges. We built a bridge in Salzburg, Austria. One block away. How many people here saw that move? It's on music. That church, right 1 block away from where we were. I was Catholic at the time, and there's been many prayers in that place. beautiful. But you can't compare, you're fighting humans, no matter what branch of the service. You either shoot them or they shoot you or whatever. But they're all the same. They're still human beings like us. You gotta forget, and I was raised German. I could speak German before I could speak English. And when I went in overseas, I had to sign a special paper that I had no problem about shooting in German. So I was also the company interpreter. So that was a good, I made a lot of friends with prisoners. So it was a good experience.
You know, what the American people doesn't realize, and what's not written in history books, is that in the 30s, when Hitler had called all Germans,
One of the battles, the Germans lost a lot of equipment that they couldn't replace. Why is that being?
well, because the German war industry was being closed in, and they had relied themselves on slave labor, and during World War II, 61% of the working force were women during World War II. Yes, sir. You have questions?
You were mentioning that before that Germans weren't used to, came off the Russian front, they were used to fighting the Americans. What was different about that for the Germans?
When the Germans fought the Russians, it was a no holds barred. There was nothing off the table. They very rarely ever took prisoners, and they didn't accept surrenders. Except when they fought the Western Allies, it was customary to not only accept prisoners, but in frontline units where prisoners had not been moved to the rear, there was customary through different units to exchange prisoners on the spot. And this happened a lot with the Western Allies. It didn't happen with the Eastern Allies. They figured as many less Russians they had to fight, they might as well just be done with them and not have to have them come back again. Yes, ma'am.
Well, then what happened to the 7,500 American troops that you showed? So
They went into different prisoner of war camps throughout Germany, and they were held there until the end of the war, or until they were basically, what they did was they would take the the American prisoners and move them to the eastern side, and they would take the Russians and move them to the western side. So that's how they did it. Yes, sir. Yes.
Another question, I have a comment, if you get to recognize these gentlemen. I'm a Vietnam vet, but all I have to say is, everybody knows me. I'm going to say it anyway. If it weren't for you gentlemen, us Americans, it's the German and or Japanese. And I applaud you. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I'm a Vietnam vet like this gentleman. I just want to salute all of you battered bastards of Bastogne. Thank you.
I wanted to say this while I got everyone's attention, because I'll probably forget. We have a history symposium series that's going to be going for the next 2 months or 3 months. We have naval aviation, and January
12th was meant as.
12th. January 12th, we have naval aviation. We have on the 24th.
Right.
24th. We have flyers up in the front. Of course, I don't have a flyer with me.
It's right behind you. Stand by, John.
See, no, I got it right here. I don't need your help anymore. We have flyers up in the front. January 24th, we have the mighty 8th Air Force. And a veteran is here that's going to do a symposium with us. On his 14th mission, he was shot down and captured and spent the rest of the war in a prisoner of war camp. And he has a To Die For scrap album that's up by the tent up there of his experiences in Germany during World War II. I'm very happy and pleased to tell you that on February 7th we are blessed by another real American hero, and that is gold medalist Mark Wells from the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team, who's going to be here. Mark does not do symposiums, but he's a firm believer in the museum. He's going to do a symposium here. You'll be able to talk to Mark about his experiences about making the team, and then his strong ties, because his father's a Korean War vet and his uncles were World War II vets. And then on February 15th, we're going to have a symposium with Marines, Semper Fi, about the Marine Corps in World War II. So we really appreciate you being out here. Sir, you have another question?
The story of Blue Zapparini is coming out, I think, in another week. Outstanding.
Unbroken, yes. Yeah, that movie looks very good. And what makes it very good is because it was overlooked by the Golden Globe. So anytime they overlook a movie, you know it's pretty good. Yes, ma'am.
I would say the little bit emotional. I personally, I was in Belgium in World War II, and I remember the Battle of the Bulge, it was yesterday. I was 8 years old. And the fear that we have of the Germans coming back is just unreal. And I want to thank you, gentlemen, because I feel like you saved my life. If I'm here today, it's just you. Thank you very much.
One of the outreach programs of the museum is that we're doing a videotaping of veterans of not only World War II, but Vietnam, Korea, and right up through Afghanistan and Iraq. If you would like to be videotaped and your story told, Brian Lowers, where's Brian? I just saw him. Beautiful Brian Lowers right there. Good looking. I don't know about beautiful, but good looking. Brian is basically hosting it here at the museum, and we're going to be videotape it. It's going to go on our YouTube channel, and we're going to be sending links to all the schools in the area nationwide, so that these first-hand accounts can get recorded, and so for future generations. Yes, sir.
I just have one, and I was wondering what were their feelings when they first got word that the war was over? And what was their thought that Hitler was done and the regime was over? That was it. We had won.
What did you think when the war was over? Thank The 101st ended their service just outside Berchtesgaden, which was the Eagle's Nest. The interesting thing about this town was you had to be a card-carrying Nazi party member. So there was no more denying that you didn't know anything. You couldn't just hide and say, no, I didn't know anything. I ran a simple butcher shop, or I was a postman. I didn't know anything was going on. In this town, you knew what was going on. George, what'd you think when the war was over? What'd you think, George?
I can't recall what I was thinking about. I know that I was wanting to get back to college because I dropped out after a girl at Northern called me a draft dog.
George dropped out of college to go in the Army. Arnold, what'd you think when the war ended?
After 3.5 years, I'm sure glad to get out.
Arnold worked for Hudson's for years as an upholsterer of furniture, right downtown Detroit. Yep. It's amazing how these guys. Yes, ma'am.
My uncle was not in the Battle of the Bulge. He was further east, and at the end of the war, he was around Munich. And on the 5th, before the armistice on the 8th, or the end of the war, his postcard said, "We hear that there's going to be the end of the war soon, but there's a lot of shooting going on." And then on May 11th, several days after, he said, "We hear that it's actually over now, but there's still a lot of shooting going on where we are."
Ray, what did you think when the war ended?
Glad it's over.
Bill, what'd you think?
Just kept adding up the points. Figure when I was going to get out.
Joseph, you were in Gibraltar, right, when the war ended?
Yeah,
He was stand up, Joseph. Joseph was a prisoner of war in the British-held island of Gibraltar, and there was no fences. There was no.
we were free to go any place we wanted. but we couldn't go downtown Gibraltar. But otherwise, we could move around the whole island. And the food was good, and we had paid for our labor. And we didn't know what to do with that money, so we bought sardines, soap, and to make a package. Every month, we were allowed to send the package home to the parents. So the parents couldn't figure out we lived better than the kids.
I'll tell you another interesting thing, Joseph. You know that? Yeah, there was you knew that. Prisoner of war camp right here. Now, the skill set to be in that prisoner of war camp was that you had to be a machinist, an engineer, a tool and die maker, something of a highly skilled trade. When the war ended, how many of those folks you think actually went back to Germany and Italy? The war in May 1945 in a German hospital. American hospital? In Paris. Tough duty for Chad. Paris. Yes, sir.
Those prisoners that came to the state fair, they were from the front of the Battle of the Bulge, or was just
No, they were throughout the entire war.
Okay.
And when you go through different interrogations, they would ask you what was your skill set, and this and that. My uncle was captured in the Battle of Bulge, late January 1945. Except he was a chaplain, he couldn't carry a rifle, or couldn't carry a weapon. Second time he'd been captured, he was captured in Italy, and then the camp was overrun 5 days later. And then of course he was captured in the Battle of Bulge. Spoke fluent German, spoke fluent high and low German because there's different dialects.
Here's the question.
Okay, I'll get to you in 1 second. I got you. Okay.
We've been trying to get your attention for a half hour.
Okay, I'll get 1 second. You'll be the next one. So what happened was when he went to the prisoner of war camp, which was an officer's prisoner of war camp, he told me he was from the immigration service, and that he could possibly get as many of these guys in the United States. So the treatment of the American officers was much better, and this and that, but their camp was right in the west until they ran into British lines about 25 miles later. So I'm going to bring up, then I'll call on you, sir. When they had the Nuremberg trials in '46, there was only a half a dozen to a dozen officers that were actually brought up on charges of crimes against humanity, crimes against countries from the Battle of Bulge. There was only maybe a dozen, and very few of them were executed. Only 4 were executed. Even Piper himself, who had orchestrated the massacre, he was not brought up on any charges at all, because he had a very good defense, and they said that his defense was he couldn't release the prisoners, he couldn't take care of the prisoners, so he actually got out of it. He must have had some information that the Americans wanted badly. Did you get any souvenirs?
Did I bring any souvenirs?
Did you bring any souvenirs home?
I don't think so.
John, did you bring anything home? He brought home some uniforms. Brand new. Only been dropped once. Arnold, did you bring anything home? German pistol, yeah, the Luger. Hey, I wanted to bring us your attention before you leave. You can come up here and talk to these gentlemen, but these are George's 3 books right up here that he wrote. George has been an author, and Don Burkett also, but George has been an author and statesman for the 101st for many, many years, since World War II. So I thank you very much for your kind attention. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
One of the gentlemen said, we talking about at the end of the war, he said he had his points, he wanted to go home, I think he said.
Yes.
My father, one of the many stories my father would tell was that at the end of the war in Europe, he was saying he wants his points, I want to go home, so they kept him there longer. And he was like, really, some frogs want to give him a medal, he wanted to go home. But they found after he died, why they kept him there, he was among the men that went in and opened up the concentration camps.
These 101st did run into quite a number of concentration camps in 1945. So, well, I thank you for your kind attention. Please feel free to come by the museum. We're open every Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Enjoy the vehicles. You are allowed to go in the vehicles, sit in the vehicles, enjoy yourselves, and I thank you very much for your kind attention. It was all
Preview. Preview.